This series is sponsored by the Old School Football Shop.
Old School Football is a UK-based retro football company honouring the rich history of football past by creating high-quality embroidered vintage team crests on t-shirts, polos, hoodies and scarves. Minimalist badges from the 1800s right up to the 1990s.
On the website oldschoolfootball.co.uk, you can find English League and non-league, Scottish football, international teams and even rugby. And what's more, until the end of the lockdown podcast, listeners can get 10% off their whole catalogue plus free UK delivery. Just use the code HONEST10 at checkout for 10% off.
You can follow them on Twitter at OSF Shop, Instagram at Old School Football Shop, TikTok at Old School Football, Facebook at Old School Football Shop, and don't forget, just use HONEST10 at the checkout for 10% off.
Hello and welcome to Coaching Diaries, a new series from the Honest Football Podcast. I'm Charlie Betts and I'm a part-time football coach and a PE teacher. As a teacher, I've always been fascinated by the way coaching works in different sports and the impact that can have on me as a football coach. Over the next few weeks, we're going to meet different expert coaches from different parts of the sporting world. We're really going to drill down into their philosophies, values and techniques of their field and find out what makes them so great at their discipline and how it can improve both you and me as coaches and as people. If you like what you hear, then don't forget to like, share and subscribe and comment below on anything that you've drawn from this series that you might want to share with others. Next up is one of the most experienced coaches we'll meet this series. It's baseball expert Mike McRae. Mike was a college athlete at both ice hockey and baseball with hopes of going to the Olympics with the latter. Following a serious shoulder injury, Mike became a coach and has since had a successful career coaching universities across America and subsequently was the first Canadian to be a Division I head coach in the whole of the United States. Following a successful spell as head coach of Canisius University in Buffalo, New York, to which the team competed nationally, reaching the NCAA multiple times, Mike can now be found plying his trade at Virginia Commonwealth University. Mike is very frank and honest about his coaching journey and really challenged me on the importance of surrounding yourself with a competitive environment. You can keep up to date with Mike's program on Twitter at VCU Baseball, and as always, you can keep up to date with what we're doing at Honest Football Free. Introducing Coaching Diaries with baseball expert Coach Mike McRae. And I'm delighted to say that Mike is with us now. So, Mike, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you giving up the time. It's obviously quite, it's your morning and my afternoon, so obviously the time difference, but I appreciate you sort of getting up so early to talk to us. So thanks very much for that.
Not a problem. Happy to be here and, and certainly enjoying the opportunity to speak with you all.
So obviously, Mike, you're working in baseball now, and we're going to go into a lot more detail about what you're doing in terms of your career and the journey of that. But what I wanted to really know was where that all began for you. And I know that obviously, I think a lot of the coaches that I've spoken to throughout this series always seem to have another sort of second sport or something else they happen to be good at as well as the one that they're working in. But I'll be fascinated to hear your sort of journey really of how you got into baseball and where that all started for you, if that makes sense.
Sure. So it's ironic you bring up the second sport piece because when I grew up, I was a two-sport guy. I was a hockey and a baseball player. I'm originally from Niagara Falls, Ontario, Canada. So you didn't have much of a choice growing up there other than to lace up some skates. So I grew up playing in both, and that was at a time where and I kind of miss these days a little bit. Like hockey started in Labor Day and went until March break, and then baseball started as soon as the weather broke and went right until Labor Day. And right. There wasn't the overlap that there is now where, even my son, when he went through it at 12 years of age, coaches are saying, well, like, are you going to give the other one up in order to concentrate on this sport all year round? And, I would say to the coaches, like, why? Like, he's 12 years old. He's not even in high school. He doesn't have a job. He hasn't met a girl. He hasn't, like, so many life experiences he hasn't even done yet. Like, why are we pigeonholing? What if he wants to be a piano player? Like, we don't even know yet. Like, let the kid have some fun and enjoy and grow as an athlete. And, there'll be time enough for him to specialize later if that's, the path he chooses. So I was grateful that I didn't have to do that, but it also created a problem because when I was ready to be done with my high school days, I couldn't choose. I loved the sport I was playing at the moment, and I wasn't ready to give one up. So I actually chose a college in the Northeast in the state of Maine where they were going to give me the opportunity to play both sports in college.
Oh,
now,
wow. That sounds like the dream now, I've got to be honest. That's
I thought the same thing, but to be honest with you, it was extremely, extremely challenging. It was a very high academic school. That was the deal I made with my parents, was that I would go to the school that was, going to be the best academic fit. And there was an overlap of the two sport. I found that I had a lot of great opportunities in baseball and without realizing it, and felt like I was hitting a lot of roadblocks in hockey. And sure enough, in my freshman year in college, I ended up with, I can joke about this now, but I ended up with 3 concussions, 2 in hockey and 1 in baseball, amazingly, on a comebacker off the mound. So, you think about that nowadays, I probably would have been kicked out of sports, right? Like nobody would enable me to come back and participate.
No, you're right.
That actually, much head trauma. But in any event, I only played the hockey component in my second year there, and then just finished off my career strictly as a baseball player and tried to play it post. In those days, I wanted to, be a participant on the Canadian Olympic team because it was before professionals were permitted.
Right.
And that was a huge goal of mine. And I tried for the year and a half, post college, and it didn't work out. I hurt my shoulder. And honestly, that shoulder injury is when I probably started to move into the coaching side of things. I had started working some camps. I did that in the summer for some people. Camps weren't big. They were just starting to grow, especially in Canada. And I started to get into the coaching and the teaching side of the game. And I fell in love with it. I started to realize now I wasn't just going to impact one person, being myself as the player. I now had the ability to impact multiple people. And I fell in love with that side of it. Got into the coaching side, continued to pursue it. And from there, I'll be honest, I got really, really lucky. I caught some really good breaks. I had some people that were willing to give me some experience because I lived in a border town in the U.S. This was pre 9/11 days, so crossing the border wasn't the challenge that it certainly became. So I was able to get some experience that eventually led to a coach down in South Carolina who wanted to take a chance on recruiting Canada. And so he thought the best way to do it was to give me the opportunity to come on board and help, attract some recruits from north of the border down to that school. And from there, my career just kind of grew. And
just really quickly, Mike, sort of jumping in there, if you don't mind me. Sorry to interrupt. Did you feel a bit of pressure on that then? Not that you were the sole representative of Canada, but by the sounds of it, you were the figurehead for it in that sense, or like the pioneer for that. Did you feel a bit of pressure on yourself? Because the coaches we've spoken to, I've never really heard that before, so that's quite a lot to sort of deal with, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, I never felt that pressure of it whatsoever. I just looked at it as I was pursuing a career I loved, right? Like that's the way I looked at it, and I loved what I was doing. I never looked at it. Maybe I was too young and naive to think that it was a pressure type situation, but I was never motivated by pressure or fear. I was motivated by pride. So I loved it, to be honest with you. And I left, I was at Winthrop University, and then I ended up taking the job as the pitching coach at the University of Maine. And that was a great learning ground because I got thrown to the wolves from a recruiting / coach. And it was an awesome environment to learn and develop as a coach. And then from there, I landed my first head coaching job, which was at Niagara University, which actually brought me back close to home again which from a family perspective was awesome. We had just started a family and had a chance for relatives to see, my children. And that at that time, I believe I was the first and only Canadian to be a Division I head coach in the United States of America. So that was a unique, I guess, caveat to my name. So
that's incredible, Mike. No, I appreciate you being so sort of honest about that, actually, because I suppose there's a lot to sort of unpack there, really, in that sense. In terms of that going from, the transition of the sort of head coach and stuff, we'll sort of go into that a bit later on, but was that the sort of route that you wanted to take when you were at, when you were at college yourself, or what I'm saying is did you always sort of have that ambition, or did you sort of fall into that route that you then took, if that makes sense?
Well, certainly not in college. I had aspirations of going to law school. And
right.
To be honest with you, I really wanted to be in the U.S., so I only applied to U.S. law schools, got accepted to a couple, but unfortunately they would not offer financial assistance to foreigners, or in this case, Canadians. Right. So it just, my family wasn't in a position to pay for it, and those law schools wouldn't provide loans. So I didn't have an opportunity. And then when I went back, I took a gap year after college because I was still trying to pursue the baseball side of it, and worked a little bit to make some money and support myself. And then, excuse me, that's when I started to kind of dabble into the training and teaching of young men, and from a coaching standpoint. And I ended up going back to get my master's in education because I thought that was kind of the way to get into the coaching side of it, if that's the direction it was going to take me. So no, it wasn't until post-college that I even started having thoughts of that being a career destination.
Right. Just really quickly, Mike, because, I could explain it, but you're involved in all of this and you'd be able to explain it a million times better than me. We'll have listeners, obviously, who are familiar with baseball and the game and that, but particularly in this country, we're probably not as clued up on how the process works of, like you were saying, going from then college and then potentially getting a professional contract, and how does that sort of pathway work sort of post education, really, just for people who maybe are a bit more unfamiliar with it, who would be listening, if that makes sense, just to give us a bit of context of where you're working in that sense.
Yeah, so you've got, like, the Major League Baseball draft can impact in a few different time periods, I guess. You can be drafted as a high school senior and go right from high school into the pro ranks. And I think the percentage they say of that is around, I think it's less than 30%, I believe. And please don't shoot the messenger if I'm off a little bit there. I'm probably pretty close. I think, and then you can also be drafted after your third year in college, and again or after your fourth year in college, right? So there is, if you do go to college, you're going to have some educational background to your credit. And then I want to say those numbers are approach around 60%. And I think the last 10% is made up of signings from, like, the Dominican and Venezuela and some of those Latin American countries, or it could be from parts of Europe.
Right.
Like, that it's called international signings, I think, make up the last 10% or so. So you've got different avenues. A young man can be drafted out of high school and decide, hey, I'd rather go to college. I want to start my education. I'm not mature enough to sit on a bus and live a really, really tough existence for the next few years and try and make it to the big leagues. And so I'm gonna use the collegiate time to kind of develop, physically, emotionally, and grow myself, and then hopefully get that shot again, right, 3 or 4 years later. Yeah. So, and I think they have shown that in the big leagues, that has been the most productive path.
Yes.
I guess it's just, if you're a high school kid and you're drafted in the first couple of rounds and people are offering you millions of dollars and the prestige of, the LA Dodgers or the New York Yankees or the Toronto Blue Jays, that's a hard thing to walk away.
Yeah, no, of course. I've got to be honest, I spoke to, obviously, your friend, Dave Smith, the ice hockey coach, previously about this. But one thing I've always thought is so admirable about, the way North America does sort of sport, and particularly we'll go on to it a bit later on, but is how important the education side of it is. And actually, like you were saying, that, people balancing that up. I think in this country where we are with football, it is because of the riches of the money, like you said. People's heads get turned so quickly, and it's that longevity of it. But that's one thing I've always admired about North American sport, is the how important and how closely linked the education system is to the to the progress of these players. And that, I think it's fascinating. Like you say, that quite often people would take that route and stay at college almost, rather than go straight for the big leagues, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the one thing that doesn't get publicized enough, though, is, like, the college guys that are in my program right now, their daily life is heads and tails better than what a minor league baseball player's life is.
Oh, really? Okay.
Oh, it's not even close. From a travel standpoint, to a accommodations and where they live, to the way they're fed, to the way, like, to the way we can train them. Like, we have a full-time trainer and strength and conditioning coach, and we have, you know, mandatory weightlifting sessions that are set up for these guys. And, you know, the minor league system it's a tough grind for those guys. They could sit on a bus for 12 hours in the middle of the night, get into the hotel at 6 a.m., sleep for 5 hours, and then they have to head to the ballpark that night. And you know, the percentage that moves up that chain is extremely challenging, and a lot of it is financially based. Like, if an organization has so much invested in a young prospect, he's going to get the opportunity over somebody that's playing better. And they don't advertise that part of it. So
no.
Sometimes the decision to go to college, if you're confident in your abilities, you're going to live a much better lifestyle on a daily basis. Along the way, you're going to start your education. You know, you may not finish it, but you could get 3/4 of it done or more. And probably for me, the biggest piece of it, and I've heard this repeatedly from minor league coaches as well as agents, is that at the end of the day, a lot of those college guys are just in a better place physically and mentally, right? There's some maturity that's happened there. And, you know, when you're 18 years old playing professional baseball in the minor leagues, like, you think you're a little better than you really are. And you often carry yourself that way, right? Like, look at me, I'm a pro player. And even though you're in low A ball, which is a long ways away. So I think they emerge as a better, you know, in essence, a better person, you know, having some of that collegiate experience as a background.
Yeah, no, I completely, I hadn't ever thought of that. And I really appreciate you sort of saying that, actually, because when you think about it, that is mind blowing. And the travel alone, because I mean, where we are, you know, it feels like going from, my dad lives in, so I'm in England, but my dad lives in Wales, which is about a 3-hour journey, and that feels long enough. But like you say, to go 12 hours to play, you know, go and play baseball, it seems crazy for people like us, but actually, obviously, that's the reality, I think. And that was the sort of thing I wanted to move on to, really, is obviously where you're coaching now and have been in that university system. Obviously, it's a full-time position, but it's quite a demand, isn't it, on your sort of time? It's not like maybe the equivalent of here of, you know, sort of games being fairly local. I mean, imagine the travel alone, that, you know, that takes up so much of your time, really, in that sense.
Yeah, it's like the time, you know, and again, this is why, you know, people say, you know, choose a career you love and you never work a day in your life, right? And that that, you know, certainly applies to my situation completely. Now, in a normal year, and obviously this is not a normal year, when we start practice in January 15th, I personally wouldn't have a day off until June. You know, it's a 7-day a week, you know, 16-hour-a-day job.
Yeah.
You know, if you want to, I hate using that word with it, but, and that's because it's a constant, there's just so much involved with it once you're in season. Now, yeah, the travel component is significant, but one of the huge advantages of the move that I made, I was the head coach up at a school in Buffalo, New York, and that's where Dave Smith and I became friends.
Yes.
And now I'm down in Richmond, Virginia, and that has reduced my travel tremendously. One, because in the beginning of the year, in February and March, we can play at home, whereas we could not up there, right? You're hammered by weather and snow, and here we can play at home. And, you know, there's also so many more schools within a, you know, 3-hour drive from here that we can go play, that it's really reduced my travel and bus time tremendously. And that was a big piece of my move. I'd had enough of ridiculous bus travel and that sort of thing. So that the travel is a piece of it, but you know what, now with these Wi-Fi packs, the bus time is spent, like, I'm doing work, I'm doing scouting reports, I'm sending emails, I'm looking at video, I'm preparing for the next week or game. And you know, the bus just becomes a different work environment.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's complete. I really sort of, that's something that we'll probably never experience in this country because the journey's never long enough. But it's, but no, I appreciate you sort of saying that. That was just the sort of last question, really, before we find out a bit more about your sort of coaching approach, etc. Sort of on a personal level, and you'd have to forgive me on the pronunciation of this. When you were at Canisius, have I said that right? Is that the...
Yes.
So
Canisius.
obviously coaching, I believe you got to the NCAAs. In terms of that's an incredible achievement. What was the experience like coaching at that? And what did you learn from that experience?
Well, so my Niagara and then transition to Canisius experience were a little bit similar. And I'm sorry if I'm taking you back a little bit, but
no, please do. Absolutely.
I took over, like when I got to Niagara, the baseball program there had only made the playoffs once. I can't even remember in how many years. All right. And so it was definitely a rebuilding effort. And one recruiting class, we got into the playoffs for the next 2 years, set school record for wins, and had done that very, very quickly. And then when I moved over to Canisius, I was only there for 3 years. I took over the program that was second from the bottom in the country. It was 292 out of 293 nationally.
Goodness me.
And yeah, they had come off of 3 straight seasons where they had 4 wins and 40 losses, 3 years in a row when I took it over. So I guess the initial piece of that was you now are recruiting against history, right? Like you've got people that look at that and say, why the heck would I ever want to go to that school and play baseball there? So you had to overcome the history of the program initially. And that presented a challenge, but I felt like I'd had a little bit of a background in how to do it because I had not to the same, depths, but I had come from a program that had also, floundered a little bit. So I was able to use that experience to turn Canisius around. And honestly, I went about investing in the right player that was going to work for me as the head coach and the leader. And it wasn't always the most skilled guy, but every one of those guys that flourished in our program, and some became all conference and all Americans, and some went on to the professional ranks, was one common denominator. And that was they competed like crazy. They could have been undersized. They could have been slow. They might have not have had a very good curveball as a pitcher. But at the end of the day, those guys that helped resurrect that program and lead it to conference championships and the NCAA tournament was because they were extremely competitive. And that's a trait of the head coach.
No, absolutely.
That I didn't waver on. I couldn't because I couldn't coach the guy that wasn't competitive.
Yeah, no. I appreciate you sort of saying that, and that sort of leads nicely onto the sort of next part of the sort of talk, really, Mike. In that sense, when you first started out as a coach, what do you think your philosophies were in the sense were they different to what you were just talking about, or what did you sort of value as a coach, and then has that changed compared to now? So do you still have those same sort of values and philosophies maybe that you had when you first started, if that makes sense? And you alluded to it lovely there with the NCAA sort of thing.
I would say that a lot of things have changed over the years personally. And I say that from a good thing. I think we have to. I think if you're going to be a coach and be successful, then you have to evolve. You like things have changed. Some of the research has changed and the players have changed. And I think too many people use that as an excuse when it comes to the player side. They say, well, players today are different from our years. Well, is that true, or is that because we've enabled that? And I think often we've enabled that. And I still think there are tough young men out there. I still think there are competitive people out there. And, I value it more now than I did then. Like, I really do. I think that if you find a skilled guy that is a highly, highly competitive young man, he's worth more in a scholarship, in my opinion, because that's a rare combination. So I would say when I started, I was really caught up in the talent level.
Right.
And I got really frustrated because my 2 head coaching positions, I was at schools that initially couldn't get the talent level. So then I had to err on the side of, well, I got to at least get the competitive guy, because I felt like I could teach and build their skill set and improve upon that and turn them into players that could function in our system. And I think we did do that. And then as success came to the program, then we were able to attract more talented players, right? Because they say, hey, look at them, they win. Like that's a good place to go. And look, they're moving guys on to professional baseball. So that could be me. And I think that is how it kind of evolved, but it also evolved with the growth of the player, or the growth of the program, excuse me. The other change that I would say that I, undertook, and I think this is really common with either new or young coaches, is you think too often in teaching from a standpoint of what worked for me personally.
Yes. Yeah.
And
completely.
that is so wrong. Like, I think that is so wrong, because that's only one way to do it. And you, as time and experience, you start to learn that there's a lot of ways to get this young man to, improve his swing. And you've got to find what works for this young man, and how you can convince him and make him see it, and get him to you got to find the method that works for him. And that is what experience teaches you, because you'll look up and you'll say, wow, these two guys are both All-American players, All-American hitters, and they both swing the bat very differently. And, and you got to accept that. You have to accept that and recognize that, and let some of their natural abilities come through in those cases. So.
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, that's something that I struggle with, in terms of mine. So as well as being a PE teacher, I'm obviously a sort of part-time soccer coach as well. But that transition from sort of playing to coaching, I found that if I couldn't do it the way that I wanted to, like you were just talking about, that sort of the way that I was taught almost, it used to get me really frustrated. And actually, then my ego would come into it and be a bit like, well, no, that's the way I was taught, so that way is going to work. And like you were saying, it's I think you almost have to go back to the beginning, don't you? And it's not always the easiest thing to do, particularly I think if you're young and maybe feel slightly, not threatened, but, if you're coming into a new environment, you want to establish yourself, don't you? It's such a difficult time, I think, those early days of coaching.
Yes. Yeah, that's very accurate. You're spot on with that.
But yeah, no, so I sort of can see where that sort of happened. And then obviously that sort of, as progressed as you've gone on sort of now, obviously, I suppose being a head coach, do you recognise that in maybe not recognise that, but when you hire assistant coaches and people around you, is that what sort of things do you look for in them? Is it similar, like you were saying, are they sort of a bit more adaptable? And like you say, can they maybe take, various approaches to connect with a player, if that makes sense? Is that one of the things you sort of look for when you're hiring people?
Yeah, that is what I would look for. Unfortunately, during my days as a head coach, it wasn't until my last 2 years that I ever had a full-time assistant.
Right. Oh, okay.
So what happened was I originally would look for assistants that could kind of fit certain roles that we needed. And a lot of times it was players that played for me that were done and had moved on and then wanted to pursue coaching. So I would bring them on board. And like some people will criticize that because they'll say, well, they only know one system, which was yours. And that's very, very true. But it also created the advantage of they knew how we worked.
Yes.
They knew the work ethic. They knew the culture. They knew how practices had to be structured and run. And I was very, very diligent about those things. I valued those things. So at least bringing my own people back into the fold I didn't have to teach that part of it. And I thought that I could, and it took some time because like we say, those guys thought, well, this is what worked for me. So this is what's got to work for this freshman hitter. And you had to make them realize that, yeah, that worked for you, but you were unique this way. And this is why it worked for you. And it may not work for him because he may not be able to do it that way. Let's just find a way to get him to do it. And it's okay. So, but I would definitely, if I was, if I do return to becoming a head coach again someday, I would definitely look for people that are adaptable, that are open to change. That's one thing in myself. Like I'm spending hours in a day right now just trying to learn. And there are pieces that I learn that I take and I will like to apply. And there's some that I will file away and storage and think, yep, that's useful. I just, we'll see when that comes. And there's some things that I'll dismiss because I don't agree or I don't like better than what we already do. So I would want somebody that is very similar in that regard because things do change.
Yeah.
Like the game's changing. It's evolving. There's some better things that are coming around. I've always said that I thought baseball was a little too prehistoric in the way they did some things. And So if we're not going to evolve, then we're going to fall behind. Like, just a simple example. I think baseball was one of the last sports to adopt a dynamic warm-up.
Oh, really? Wow.
Oh, yeah. And I remember here's a funny story for you. The first time I ever introduced it at Niagara University, I thought my players were going to revolt.
Really?
Yeah. They looked at me like, what do you mean we're not going to stretch before we play? And I was like, nope, we're going to warm up. We're going to get the body going. We're going to wake up. We're going to get hopefully a little bit of sweat before we start practice today. And for that first couple weeks, they were angry at me. And then bit by bit, they were like, Coach, I was in the basketball game the other night, and they warm up like we do now. I'm like, no. They warmed up that way before we did. And then the Olympics comes on, and it's like, go watch the sprinters. They don't sit on the ground and lay down and stretch. They warm up, and it's ludicrous that we as a sport, we're so far behind in such and now we look at it and we're like, I mean, you guys did what? You didn't warm up, you stretched? And I was like, yep. No.
That's so true though, isn't it? Like you say, that evolving of that. And I think it sort of leads nicely onto the next bit really is as you were saying, maybe in a head coach and an assistant coach, how much more on the ground sort of coaching are you doing in compared in those two roles? So as a head coach, do you have to be a bit more sort of take a step back, observe the whole practice and maybe more, and then do you maybe drop into particular bits where you might go work with the pitchers one day or work with the hitters? Do you know, how does that sort of work really, the difference between the two roles that you've had?
Sure. So the problem, I shouldn't say problem. The downfall of being the head coach is you are torn in so many directions that are away from the field of play that it can become draining. In other words, you have to handle all of like scheduling and practice scheduling and class organization and fundraising and, academic advising and rules and compliance and all of these administrative meetings that you have to attend. That I don't know what percentage they make up, but it wouldn't shock me if somebody said that was 75% of the job.
Wow, goodness me.
And people never realize that, right? Like people think, oh, it's great. Like you just go to the park every day and teach a kid how to throw a curveball and like it's awesome. Well, if it was that, then I would agree with that statement. But at the college level, the head coach does all those things and he oversees all those things. And the amount of paperwork that's involved from a rules standpoint, from a recruiting standpoint, from guys that have committed to your program next year and the year after, and the things you have to do to keep them, on track to make it happen. It's a constant, endless, paper chain, for lack of a better expression. And so that part of it, yes, you're at the forefront and you ultimately get to make all the decisions, which, I think there's a lot of alpha males that are head coaches.
Yes. Yeah.
And probably alpha females that are head coaches as well. And which is some people just can't work for somebody for that reason. But at the end of the day, you do far less teaching than the assistants do. And like I'm at a school right now in Virginia Commonwealth that is like, we are very well supported by our administration. So we are, in addition to our head coach, we've got 2 full-time assistants, plus a volunteer, plus a graduate assistant. So we have a tremendous amount of resources and help. So now it's flipped. I spend 75% of my time teaching.
Right.
And or recruiting, right? Like, cause we do all of our recruiting. So, but like I go to work with the pitching staff today and I've got my boots in the ground and I'm with them every single day. And then there's times at night where like I'll have watched a kid's video that from him throwing that day, and I'll literally be communicating with him and saying, listen, after watching your film today, here's what I'm seeing. Do you see this? Oh yeah. So like that teaching component doesn't end when practice ends. It can go on all night, or yeah. I'll see something online and I'll be like, wow, this is really neat. And it might apply to 2 of my pitchers. So I'll send it to them and say, hey, like, take a look at this. This may work for you, right? And that goes back to the teaching of the individual rather than what worked for me. I won't send that to the whole pitching staff. I may send it to just 2 guys that I thought it would have a better meaning for. So that part of it I've enjoyed. I'm sure like every assistant in America, there's days you step back and you think, well, geez, I really wish we were doing this instead of that, because it's the head coach's decision. But at least having been a head coach, I don't say it now, right?
Yeah, as I say, you've got the best of both worlds, haven't you? I sort of feel like that in a sense. So in terms of equivalencies, I'm an assistant coach in be equivalent of. I did a very short stint as a head coach, and I've got to be honest, I hated every minute of it, Mike. I wasn't strong enough. I couldn't cope with it. And I preferred I didn't really like the fact that I wasn't on the training pitch doing stuff a lot more, So I think it depends on your personality, doesn't it? Some people, like you were just saying, much prefer to have that ratio of 75% sort of on-field practice, maybe a bit of admin at the end. And other people excel the other way around, don't they?
Sure. Yeah. Yep. You're right.
Just on that then, maybe thinking a bit more recently, because obviously you would, like you say, you'd be on the practice field a lot more sort of in your current role. How do you know when you've had a good day? And I know that sounds a bit silly, but I mean, from a baseball sort of coaching perspective, how do you know when you've sort of delivered some good, high quality sort of coaching and sessions, really? What sort of indicators do you get from that?
I think, and there's different times of the year where that's probably a different answer. But if we're in the middle of our season, I would say if my guys are healthy and improving, then that's like every day's goal.
Yeah.
Right. I want them to continue. I want them to be healthy because nobody's good if they're on the sidelines. And I take pride in keeping our pitchers healthy because that's essential to our success. So those two things are kind of daily goals: health, improve.
Yeah.
And I think the term comes from the Japanese. It's called kaizen, continuous improvement, even in small increments. If I'm headed in that direction, then I think we're in a good place.
Yeah, no, I've only come across that recently. I was reading a book about a rugby coach in England, and he mentions that Kaizen. Yeah, that approach, something I've never heard of before, but it's incredible. He sort of talks about 1%ers, like every day. If you improve every day by 1%, eventually you're going to obviously get to where you want to be in that sense. So yeah, no, I appreciate your honesty with that, Mike. Actually, it was very, very good of you. Just this next question, if I'm honest, it's slightly self-indulgent because it's something that's probably my biggest weakness as a coach, which is dealing with negativity. So I'd love to pick your brains really on, and it could be as a head coach or, maybe an assistant coach, whichever you'd prefer to sort of answer from. But how do you deal with negativity from sort of players? Maybe a player who's not, do you know what I mean? Like doesn't really want to take part in practice that day or is not really engaging with it because it's something that as a soccer coach, because you're working with lots of players at a time, it's something that I just haven't got time for, I feel like. And it's definitely my biggest weakness. I'm trying to get a book of different strategies from different coaches, really, of how to deal with that.
Yeah, I have very little tolerance for that as well. I will echo your sentiment there. And if you find that book, please share it. Honestly, I think the first thing I would say about that is it starts with you as a leader. And if you're going to be negative or down in the dumps or miserable every day, well, then how can you expect your players not to be that and not to feed off of that? So I think it starts with you. I think you have to model those behaviors that you want. And if you show up with energy and excitement and wanting to learn and wanting to get better today, then you can expect that of them. I don't know if you guys have watched any of The Last Dance with Michael Jordan.
No, I personally haven't, but I know loads of friends who have. But he's on my list at the minute. I'm sort of doing a bit of DIY, but as soon as I've got that out of the way, it's definitely something to watch. But yeah, sorry, go on, Mike, you were saying.
So one of Michael Jordan's comments is, I don't ask anything of my teammates that I don't do myself. And I feel that way as a coach, that you have to do a lot of that. Yeah. And then I think you can turn around and say, hey, don't bring that negative stuff around here. Don't come today. Don't show up. Right? Like, I think that's okay. And as a head coach, obviously I was way more involved in the discipline. So honestly, there were days that if a young man, if I addressed it and he continued to show that type of behavior, then eventually I'd kick him out of practice. I had done that before. And because I always told the guys, practice is for the coaches. Game day, performance day is for the players.
Yeah, no, I think that makes perfect sense. Just really quickly jumping in there, Mike, sorry. Obviously, the difference being you working in a university, and college sort of system. How does that work in terms of, like you were saying, how much link do you have to the academic side? And by that I mean, if they're sort of flunking in class or not doing what they should, does that then impact on them coming to sort of baseball practice, etc., or is it almost two separate entities? Because like you were saying about that negativity, I suppose if that spills over into their academic side, does that have a direct impact on what you do with them then, if that makes sense?
It does. And I think a lot of coaches handle that differently. I think, unfortunately, a lot of coaches will make the decision based on their ability as well. Yeah. And I don't think that's fair. Like, if you're going to have academic standards for your team, and the NCAA has some, but then every team has some. And I think if you're going to have them, I think that should be transparent of his ability. That doesn't happen in a lot of places. No. And that was one thing when I was a head coach I did. And I told guys, like, here's the deal. We miss a lot of class to play games. If you don't take care of your academics, you're not coming on the bus. And, sometimes you have to sacrifice today to win tomorrow. And I've done that in my career, where a young man had skipped class. It was a class that he was failing. I found out the day we were traveling. I said, Jimmy, you're not coming with us this weekend. Why not, coach? What do you mean? Why not? I go, you didn't go to class today, and you're failing that class. Whoa. And then you know what? I left him home. He missed the 3-game series. He was one of our best hitters. And I think it does two things. One, I never had a problem with him again the rest of his career, and this was his second year. And two, the other guys know. And they know that it didn't matter to coach whether he was our best player or our worst player. There were standards, and those standards had to be upheld. And, they may not like it, and they may be frustrated in the moment, but I think in a bigger picture, I think they appreciated and recognized that I didn't treat him any differently than I did, a lesser player. And I think that's where we do have a lot of impact on that. I think in our world, it has a greater impact, again, on game day. They want to play. And being in the starting lineup and being on the bus or being, at the game is what they want. And that's the one carrot that we have that it to me is the greatest form of discipline right there. I don't have to yell and scream then, hey, you didn't do what we asked of you this week in the classroom and off the field and working hard. So you're not going to be in the lineup today.
I think, do you know what, Mike? I think that's incredibly honest. And actually, you sort of played down at the beginning that you were saying if I sort of ever find that book to give it to you. But I think actually there's a lot of value in what you were just saying. And I think, you're probably underplaying how brave you need to be to do that. Because I think, like you say, you are potentially sacrificing a win or, especially the way sort of baseball works, you play multiple games over the course of a few days, you are sacrificing your sort of record, aren't you? But like you say, those standards, I suppose it depends what you prioritise. I think it's incredibly brave of you to sort of to take that approach. And, I wish I could do that a bit more, I suppose, in that sense. But it's, so thank you for being so honest about that, to be honest. So just moving on, Mike, we're going to sort of talk. I've got 3 sort of quick fire questions at the end, but I'm just going to talk a little bit more now about maybe your sort of day-to-day kind of stuff and a bit more about the technical. It's not too long, so I don't want you to sort of feel like you're going to be all morning in your place, but it's just what I'm fascinated by is really, as a football coach at the minute, I only get to sort of see the players maybe 2 nights a week, and then there's a game on a Saturday. But I know obviously you would hopefully have a lot more contact time with them when obviously this pandemic isn't, going on. What does that week look like? So, how much of it is sort of individual skills, sort of based stuff, and then how much, when you build up towards a game, does that change as the week goes on? Do you start to have a bit more competitive environments as the week goes on? Do you know what I'm getting at? Like, what does a week look like really?
Absolutely. So, I mentioned earlier that it is basically a 7-day a week during our season. Now, here's how that works. The NCAA dictates that we must take 1 day off a week.
Right.
And in my case, I have certain pitchers that will take a different day off than the rest of the team because of their personal training schedule to get ready for when they're going to pitch next. Right. Whereas our hitters, on the other hand, that doesn't apply to them. Our hitters will always have Monday off.
Right.
Okay. So it's kind of different based on their positions, but we play once during the week, whether it's Tuesday or Wednesday, and then we play again Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
That's incredible.
Every week. And then, so basically, if we play on, let's say Wednesday, we would practice Tuesday, play Wednesday, practice Thursday, play Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And that's every week.
That's incredible, actually. I didn't realize that.
From the start of the season right through until the playoffs. That's kind of the standard format. Yes.
So what are you doing then in those days in between? Because, you know, as you're saying, the games come so thick and fast at that point then. Because I suppose, would a lot of your work in terms of technical stuff be done in pre-season? You know, because like you say, by the sound of it, you don't actually have that many sessions between each game, do you, in that sense?
Correct. It's the preseason, which is a 6-day a week. And we try to model our season format when we're preparing for that and trying, obviously, to build up workload and especially in the pitchers to make that happen. But once that season starts, I would say it becomes less important to get repetitions and more important to, like, there are certain defensive systems. So maybe, you know, we may use one of those days to kind of refresh on that area. Here is our defense when the other team bunts. Let's practice. And it's not long. It may be 15, 20 minutes, but it's more just to remind people of where they go and principles. It's also extremely important to keep your backup players sharp during that time, because you never know if there's an injury or something happens, and you've got to rely on one of those guys, and you don't want the fact that they haven't played to affect, you know, your team's progress just because of an injury happens. So you would use that. A lot of it is you're trying to stay similar to a golfer. You're trying to stay sharp, right? Like you're trying to keep all your skills, you know, and then there may be some adjustments that have to be made, to be honest with you. This guy's really struggling with a certain pitch. So as a hitter, so you're going to have to spend time working with him individually to improve upon that area.
Right.
But I'll tell you, once the season starts, what one of the biggest roles every coach undertakes, you start to become more of a psychologist.
Oh, really? In what sense?
Because a lot of things happen once the season starts. Not everybody plays then. So now all of a sudden you've got to handle a young man that didn't get the playing time that he anticipated. So there's a psychology piece to that. Then you've got to handle the player that just had a bad weekend where he didn't get a single hit. He made 2 errors and he thinks he's the worst player in America. So there's a psychology piece to that. And then there's a pitcher that thinks he's too good for himself because he's been so successful, and you've got to bring him back to earth a little bit and remind him that, hey, that doesn't mean you can stop working. You can't lift, you can't stop working hard in the weight room, and you still got to stay on your daily throwing routines, because otherwise this success won't continue. So I joke all the time that once the season starts, we put our psychology hat on, and that becomes an everyday component of it. And not every day from a team standpoint necessarily, but these 2 players are that player. Yes. Yes.
I think it's because obviously I know you alluded to it at the beginning, but obviously because you work in sort of that Division 1, that elite level environment, I suppose the margins for error as a player are so fine, aren't they? You know, compared to maybe lower down that sort of pyramid. That, like you say, I suppose with that then the psychology is so much more important, because I suppose you can be quite fragile, can't you, in that sense? Because like you say, the margins for error are so sort of so fine, aren't they? Really, because of the level you're involved in at the elite level of the game. But,
that would be very true. And I would especially say that about the new and younger players, because those guys, very few players coming out of high school have experienced failure, right? They're always the best player on their high school team, and that's why they're playing Division I baseball. And then they come and they are going to experience some failure. Every single player, when they transition to the college game, has some adversity. And those guys that handle it quicker and respond better, they end up having more success. And those guys that don't, they do become a little bit fragile, and you really do have to coach them up and put that psychology hat on and try and get them through the tough times.
Yeah, it's incredible, really. When I was playing football, I was only at sort of semi-pro level, but and to be honest, the level I played at, it was never any big crowds or anything like that. But I remember I scored an own goal once in front of, it literally was about 50 people, Mike, if that. But I got a bit of stick for, they were sort of giving me a bit of sort of shouting, a bit of a jeering and sort of abuse from the touchlines, really. And I crumbled. I was about 18 or 19 years old, and that was with sort of 50 people. I can only imagine, the numbers you get at your games, for that sort of college baseball and stuff, to then have to be sort of making big mistakes there, and not just be. I suppose but it highlights the importance of your role as a psychologist, doesn't it? Because you talk about that kind of in pressure cooker environment. The top level of the game, and all of those people being there. The number of spectators you'd have. Just wanted to move on to one more sort of hockey. Sorry, I don't know where I'm going with that. Sorry, baseball question, Mike. I'll edit that bit out. I do apologise. I'll do that again. Just want to move on to one more sort of baseball question, Mike, really, which is, on the field, as a head coach, how much of the sort of the plays that I mean that in the sense of, like you're saying, that defensive system, for example, how much is decided by the players in the moment, and how much would you sort of communicate that that's what you want them to do? And the reason I sort of say that is in soccer, for example, we can sort of talk in the changing rooms beforehand, but once they go out on the pitch, if the defenders want to start pushing up, there's nothing I can do to sort of stop them in that sense. But how much sort of autonomy does the team have in those sort of tactical decisions, if that makes sense?
Sure. So that's a great question. It's hard to really determine like what that split would be, but like let me give you an example. Like the decision to bunt or the decision to steal is dictated by the coach. And
Got you.
I think that most coaches, the players that are in the lineup, it's going to be based on their ability to execute what's asked. And it's the same with the pitcher. Like we determine what pitch they throw, and then it's up to the player to execute that pitch or to execute that bunt as a hitter or to execute that steal if you're a base runner. And at the end of the day, I think the guys that are the best at executing are the ones that play the most. So it's like, yes, they can say, well, coach told me to bunt. I'm not bunting right now. And then a lot of times, well, then he won't be in the lineup, right? Because he didn't follow the direction. And it's the same on the defense. Like we ask our defense to do something here, and then it's up to them to execute it. And if they execute it well and it doesn't go our way, that's okay. That's the coach's decision. And that falls upon us as coaching staff, and if they don't execute it well, then that becomes next Wednesday's practice session. You go back to the drawing board and you got to work at it because it just cost us a run, or, we didn't handle it well. So it's hard to say, but in all honesty, every coach will tell you they will sacrifice some ability level for somebody's ability to execute the task that they're asked.
Yeah, no, of course. No, because I've watched baseball on the TV in this country, but I actually went to Dallas I was coaching to take a youth team from England to a football tournament there. But I managed to actually go and watch the Texas Rangers. I think it's Arlington, but to be honest, from what I can remember, they lost a lot of games that year. So, and I saw another loss. But it was fascinating because you get a completely different perspective. But I was trying to see what you were talking about, like how much is decided sort of like on the field, and how much is from the coach. But I'll
bet you at the big league level, it shifts more to the players.
Right. Oh, okay.
I think there is less strategy, to be honest with you, at the big league level. There's less bunting, there's less stealing, there's less hit and run from an offensive standpoint. And on the pitching side, the pitcher and catcher calls more of the game than they do at the college level. And there's some really good reasons for that, but so I would say at the major league level, it's probably more on the player side and shifted less away from the coaches.
No, that's fascinating. I've got to be honest, I loved it. It was a great experience, to sort of watch sport in any environment like that. But obviously, it's it's fascinating to see the sort of the pros playing it. But I've just got 3 more questions for you, Mike, and they're quick fire ones. I don't want to take too much more of your morning up, but it's So the first one is, what do you enjoy least about coaching? So if you had to really pinpoint one thing, and we'll get the negative one out of the way, but what would you say is the thing you enjoy the least about being a coach?
That's easy. Paperwork.
You're a man after my own heart with that. Yeah, it's awful.
Paperwork. Yeah. Between that and I would say a close second is discipline. Right? Nobody wants to have to, like, it's a necessary evil, but it's not fun, right?
No. No,
you're doing the right thing. It's not enjoyable.
No, I completely agree. Thank you for being so honest about that. Obviously on a positive note, what would you say and there's probably a multitude of things, especially, you've been coaching a long time and you've achieved some incredible things as a coach in the game, but what is the most rewarding part of coaching that you think?
So I would say in the short term, it is anytime you see a young man have a light bulb moment where you're trying to teach him a concept or a movement and he gets it and it clicks. And then that young man can immediately see the impact it has on his game and how much better it makes him. So from a short-term standpoint, that is extremely rewarding because you like to feel like you've helped him. Right? It may not have been your idea, but even through a little bit of what I call guided discovery, where they can kind of work through some things on their own and you're kind of throwing out a variety of suggestions and one of them sinks in, that's a very, very rewarding feeling. And then I would say from a long-term standpoint, and I'm starting to experience some of this now, it is awesome to be able to go back and go to the weddings of some of your players.
Yeah.
Like I really enjoy it. They see you in a different light then. You're no longer their head coach. You're no longer their disciplinarian. You're no longer their taskmaster. You're then just you're a friend and you're sharing a part of their, life with them. And it's that part of it is amazing because that's when you realize that you have had a positive impact on these young men because you aren't getting that invitation otherwise.
But it's true. I think you're very humble, Mike, in that sense that, it probably highlights how good a relationship you have with those players. And I think that ultimately comes back to what you were saying earlier, wasn't it? About your standards and your modeling of how you approach the game. And obviously that, they respect you for that. And so much so to invite you to their wedding. So I think you've probably underplayed how important relationships are with players in that sense, so I appreciate you being humble about that, but yeah. So just the last question, Mike, and it's always the one that sort of challenges coaches the most, really, is, no, not in a bad way. No, don't panic. No. But if I was to get any player from any team that you've coached and I was to get them to describe you as a coach, what do you think they would say?
I hope they would say that he is tough but fair, that he is constantly trying to make me better and push me to be the best player that I can be, and that he's willing to learn himself.
That's brilliant. I really appreciate you've been completely so honest in this interview, Mike, and I think even that last answer sort of testifies that, and I really do appreciate the honesty. And just, I suppose, to take away from it that the journey's never, even when you've coached at the level you have, you're always learning, and the journey's never sort of you're never a complete article as a coach, are you? I suppose you're always there's always something to learn.
Very, very true. And that's one of the things during these times right now of the pandemic that you're really seeing the tight-knit group of the baseball community, especially at the collegiate level, but even beyond the college level, is like there's a lot of us that are on so many calls together and sharing information and giving up some of what we would call trade secrets to each other, but more just kind of enjoying some companionship, right? Even though it's over a computer screen. And that's become very, very evident. And it's been awesome to try and learn and grow more as a coach during this time, and at least try and take advantage of what's, an awful experience.
And just finally, Mike, in terms of if people wanted to keep up to date with, you don't have to give out any personal details, but even your program once this is over, and particularly because I'm thinking of people who would listen to this from sort of our background of soccer or in England, where could they find out, how your your college is getting on and, things like that? Where's the best place to sort of keep up to speed with what you're doing as a coach?
So you could go to probably the website, right? It's Virginia Commonwealth University. So it's vcu.edu. And then just, we have our own athletics website as well. So VCU Rams, that would be the easiest and best place.
Fantastic. Mike, I can't thank you enough for giving up your time this morning to talk to us. It's been absolutely fantastic.
My pleasure, sir. I appreciate you having me on.